So, welcome, and I want to also maybe dedicate this lesson in the hopes that the people in Afghanistan will escape safely, that there won't be a wholesale slaughter there, and that somehow things will work out better for people who I think are in dreadful fear of their lives. It's pretty awful and awesome. So may God have mercy. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So, looking at this passage. So here we are, Ki Tezei milchama. So what's interesting is you're going to see some parallels to what we read yesterday in the Rashi. It's just that this goes a little bit, perhaps a little deeper, gives us a little more background as to some of the reasoning, etc., etc. So, Ki Tezei milchama. If you go out to battle, or when you go out to battle, Melamed, this teaches you, shebemilchemet harishut hakatuv medaber. Remember we discussed this yesterday, that a milchemet rishut is not one of those battles that they had to fight in order to conquer the land of Israel. This was a situation where if they needed to expand territory or anything like that, this was that kind of battle. Or possibly a battle to protect themselves from an invasion. So that's as opposed to milchemet mitzvah, right? Milchama, a battle, a war that was a mitzvah, that they were commanded to wage. So let's take a look at here. Here's Samachet. He says, Iyen b'sota lamed hey. You should look into the tractate Sota, page 35, Sof Amud Bet, at the end of the B side of the page. So he gives you a place to, you can find time to check these things out, the original locus of this particular comment. And there it says, Piresh Rashi. The Rashi, of course, as you know, commented on most of the Talmud. I mean, on almost every single tractate of the Babylonian Talmud. And just the thought of the amount of work and also the intellectual effort involved in such a work is mind-boggling. At any rate, de lashon ki tezei, that this expression ki tezei, when you go out, mashma, that it implies keshet ta'aleh al da'atcha latzeit, that what it means is if you decide, right, if you decide to go out. So not that you're commanded. Ad kan leshono, end of quote. Quoting Rashi. Vezeh doresh biur, and he says, Baruch Halevi Epstein says, this needs some further elucidation. Vayitba'er, and it appears, al pi ma shekatuv b'midrash rabbah, based on what is written in the Midrash Rabbah, Parshat Tzav, or the Parsha of Tzav in Leviticus, Peitet, that would be 69, chapter 69. Kol ha-mitzvot katuv bahen ki tir'eh, all the mitzvot, where it is written regarding them, ki tir'eh, if you see, ki tifga, should you come across, ki yikareh, if it should happen, right? For example, the bird's nest, right? You come upon a bird's nest, circumstances, right, that they're discussing. So here's the explanation. Imbata mitzvah liyadcha. If it happens that the mitzvah now comes at hand, right? You have an opportunity. If you now have an opportunity to perform the mitzvah associated with that circumstance, ata zakuk la'asota, you are then obliged to observe that mitzvah. The im love, however, if it doesn't, right, if this circumstance doesn't occur, I ata zakuk la'asota, you are no longer obligated to perform that mitzvah. Because you know that so many of the positive mitzvot are not conditional, right? Basically, primarily, they're not conditional. They don't wait for a circumstance. They're not circumstantial. Honor your father and mother, right? You shall love the Lord your God. These are not That's not, well, if you happen to have an opportunity to do that, then do it. It's not that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Mitzvot,
but I don't understand, Rabbi. You can take the people and their eggs, but you can't take the mother. You have to let the mother go. I don't understand that.
what don't you understand about it, Harlan?
On the when you see a nest egg, you see a nest, and you see the eggs of the young chicken there. You
Mhm.
can take the young, but you got to let the mother go. You
Yes,
can take the young to eat with or the eggs, but you
yes.
have to make. I don't get it unless you have to honor your mother and father. I don't
Oh,
know
no,
that.
no, 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 no. I don't think there's a direct connection there. Okay, so that's in this particular parsha, Harlan. And I think what it's saying is if you have an opportunity to benefit, you don't want to be greedy. Okay? And
Oh,
basically, if you were to take the mother and the children, you are wiping out that particular little family of birds. And I think it's, at least from their standpoint, this would an example of how God's mercy applies even in these situations. But I think it's a mitzvah, and again, that's exactly one of these things, because how many of us have come across a mother bird, on its eggs and fledglings? But the point is, you don't act in a greedy kind of way that you'd kill the mother and the eggs, and take the eggs. Right? It's a midat chesed that the Torah is trying to teach us, is to have some sense of loving kindness. Okay, that if you're given that kind of power, don't abuse it. Don't abuse it. Don't take on too much. Okay, so but here we're talking about that's exactly the kind of mitzvah we're talking about. If there is a mitzvah associated with it, and you are obligated to fulfill that mitzvah, should the circumstance arise. But you don't have to. It's not similar to most of the mitzvot. Okay. Hare mevu'ar. So it becomes clear. De lahashon ki, that when a mitzvah is started with this word ki, meaning in this case if, right? Should you. More al rishut. That it tells you regarding a rishut, that it's I think here he means, well, generally reshut would mean permission, okay? But I think in this case it means opportunity, something like that. Vahu hadin hacha, and that's the law here. That's the application here. Milchemet reshut nikret kol milchava, and defining what a milchemet reshut is any war shetchilata lak lerhachiv gvulei Eretz Israel, whose the initiation of that war is in order to extend the borders of the land of Israel. Now he doesn't speak here of a battle or a war of defense, but I would think that it would include, this is just me speaking without having researched this thoroughly, but it would seem to me that that would include a defensive battle as well, not including the 7 Canaanite nations, right? La'afuke milchama, and as opposed to a war, besheva umot, with the 7 nations, uva Amalek. Remember, we have a war against the Amalekites, v'chol shekain, and all the more so, milchamot Yehoshua, that the wars that Joshua waged, lichbosh Eretz Israel, to conquer the land of Israel, shel milchamet mitzvah heim, because they are all included as a milchemet mitzvah, as a commanded war. Excuse me. Ve'iyen besorta mem daled beh. And check it further out again, where it's discussed in the Gemara, and the Gemara really generally is pretty rigorous in trying to explore mitzvot and all the implications. So it isn't necessarily the last word, because there is so much incredible amount of commentary on the Gemara itself, but it goes into details, and it um, you know uh, tears apart and keeps deconstructing these things, and that's why it's a source, that the kind of source that it is of authoritative information regarding Judaism. So, onwards. Veshavita Shivyo. So the language is a little interesting here, and you, right? You take captives, right? You take captives, or you take its captives. Lerabot. This is something we also had in Rashi yesterday. Lerabot Knaanim. This is coming to include Canaanites. In other words, one of the 7 nations, Shebachutz le'aretz, that live outside the land of Israel. She'im chozrim b'tshuva. This is the additional little piece that's so cool, I think, that if in fact they do tshuva, mekablin otam, we accept them. We accept that tshuva is sincere. Okay. And again, you can see that the tractate Sota around this particular area, page 30, it looks like 38, is a great source for these particular laws. Okay.
Well, these Canaanites, they're very bad. I mean, they sacrifice their children. They do sorcery. They do, pray to the dead and all this other stuff that God abhors. So, are they going to live in Israel with the Jewish people?
So that's, remember it said, if they repent, if they give up those practices. It doesn't quite say lihit gayer, it doesn't say to become Jewish. It just means to, to practice repentance, to be sorry for what they did, and to give up those practices. And that if they're living outside the land of Israel, we accept them. We don't.
Yeah, but there are some people that can get into the Jewish religion. Edom. I think Edom was a Esau's relatives or something like that. The tribe of Edom, and also the Egyptians who put us into slavery, but they took care of us as if we were slaves. They fed us and everything. So God says on the 3rd generation, they could be Jewish again, be converted. I don't understand that either.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. It does talk about, it actually says regarding the Edomites, it just says, and the Egyptians, that basically it's understood as being allowed to marry them. Okay, and it's only male Edomites. When it comes to the Moabites, right, and I think the Ammonites, they are forbidden to the 10th generation. Again, this is all in Deuteronomy, and that understood. Okay, let me finish. That we cannot marry them ever. That you can never marry,
Right.
which raises an interesting point, because where did Ruth come from? From what tribe did she come from? She came from Moab. Ruth was a Moabite, and yet we read about how Boaz marries her. So again, it's understood that the ability to harmonize an apparent contradiction is that it only refers to the males. In other words, a Moavi velo Moavit, that a Moabite woman is not under this particular ban. It's the Moabite men. The other, and again, Harlan, I'm glad you raised it, because that in some ways explains the language that we read here, that it says she'im chozrim b'tshuva, right? That it says if they in fact turn around and repent of those horrible behaviors, we accept them. So it doesn't say that they converted. It just simply says that they practiced tshuva, and that we accept them. So, but then again, one has to understand, because I mean, what's going through my mind now is, well, what if they do choose to convert? Okay, what if they do choose to convert?
Well, the only thing is on the Moabites,
Yeah.
this Balaam, who was supposed to curse the
Yeah.
Jewish people,
Right.
and God says you can't do that. You got to bless them.
Yeah.
So the Moabites, if they just said you can't come into our territory to go to Palestine, Israel rather, but you can. But what they did, they hated the Jews so much that they did call this Balaam in, and that's why Lord says we cannot ever do the Amorites and the Moabites again
Well,
because of that.
it wasn't just that either. It was because, remember, there was the Moabite women who caused the Israelite men to
Oh yeah, that's right too.
was
Yes,
they,
that's another.
they seduced the Israelite men, right? So
Yeah.
that's also an indication of the degree to which they hated them. Anyway, I want to try and stay on topic as much as I can, so and to move on to the next one. And I hope you're enjoying this. Again,
Yeah.
it's such an additional interesting points here as he sort of goes a little deeper into these things, and the fact that we read it in Rashi already, I think, adds something to the fact that we now have a little background. Okay, so this is also an interesting comment, right? I think I took everything there. Let me see. No, we never did the Torah Temimah on this, right? Lashon zeh, this expression of Vishavita Shivyo, right? You should take, you know, the when you when you conquer them, and you know, take the people that are conquered, right? This expression meyutar, it appears to be superfluous. Kan here. Uva larabot. So this is why it comes. Larabot, to include. Lahatir, to permit. Kna'anim shebachutz la'aretz. That's why it's understood to refer to Canaanites living outside the land of Israel. Kedemifaresh, as is explained. Lashon Rashi explains it, right? Ve'efshar od, and one can additionally say, lefaresh, to explain, dehalashon v'shavita shivyo, that this expression v'shavita shivyo, right? You should. I'm sorry. I'm just blocking on the word for the people that are conquered, right? It's Chevy. Good.
Did you mean the captives?
Yes, thank you. I just brain was just not functioning well there, right? And you should capture its captives, right? Does sound a little bit like it's from the Department of Redundancy Department, doesn't it? Okay.
Does that a lot.
Yeah.
Are you supposed to take the women and children and the spoils
Let's just,
and divide them?
okay, just okay. Again, I want to stay focused on this for now. Okay, um, Harlan, you're asking a legitimate question, and the answer is, again, remember, you're only asked to exterminate, not that it's only, right? You're commanded to exterminate the seven Canaanite nations. And I mean, that is a whole big, difficult topic. We've talked about it a little bit before, and I've tried to explain. First of all, they don't exist anymore, right? We've talked about this. I don't necessarily want to go over this all over again, but yeah, I mean, I see the reason why we read these things, not to permit, God forbid, genocide, but to try to give us a measure of how obnoxious such behavior is. That this is the kind of behavior that destroys civilization, and to recognize how awful it is. Okay, so let's get back into this. Right, he's discussing this capturing captives. Mashma, it implies shet. Sorry. Okay. Shet. I think it's shet tishbe, right? Because it's from Chevy, captives. Shet tishbe ma shahu kvar shavui, because it implies that you should capture what is already captured, right? V'hainu, and that would refer ma sheba oivecha min hakna'anim. Okay, and so that's why, because they already would have been captured, that's why they're understanding it as referring to Canaanites. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, forgive me. And that is referring to that which your enemies have already captured from the Canaanites. In other words, the assumption is that the Canaanites that are living outside the land of Israel are there because they were captured by the people who were fighting the Canaanites at the time and who are now your enemies. I hope that's clear. Is that clear? I hope that's clear for you. In other words, the assumption is that these Canaanites had been captured previously, and that's why they're living in the land of Israel. In other words, you should capture those who have been captured, and that's understood to refer to the Canaanites, to include them. The imkain, and if this is the case, hashevi shebazeh hu shel haknanim, and if that's what it means, then the captives mentioned here must refer to the Canaanites. Umevoar beparsha she'acharei shenitgaira. Oh, yep. Okay, this is referring to the woman now, and he says nitgaira, and it's clarified in this parsha that after she converts, tihiyeh lecha leisha, she should now become your wife, right? Not your concubine, your wife. This is this Eshet Yafat Torah that we're talking about. And the activity that she does in shaving her head, in crying for her parents, etc., is all understood as acts of conversion. Ulefize, and according to this, then, if we follow this, mimela, it becomes clear, right, automatically, it becomes clear, mevoar, shehakna'anim shebachutz la'aretz, that when it comes to Canaanites living outside the land of Israel, im chozrim b'tshuva, if in fact they, again, he's not saying necessarily, it could be that chozer b'tshuva does refer somehow to becoming Jewish. I know that you talk about a Jewish person who's chozer b'tshuva. So with regards to a Jewish person who's already born Jewish, to be chozer b'tshuva means to return through repentance, meaning to to start to take seriously the commandments and the Torah, etc. But here it's referring, of course, to these Canaanites, mekablin otam, one accepts them immediately. So this is, I'm going to make a marking here because this is where we're going to stop today. Give me a moment, sorry. Here we go. Famous arrow, the huge arrow. We'll make it a little bit smaller. Okay. So we are going to start tomorrow, God willing, here. Right there. And I'm going to stop the share. Okay. And I'd like to hear any comments that you'd like to make at this point. Any thoughts? Yes.
I just don't understand the towns that are outside of the Jerusalem and so forth. Why we have to destroy the men and the women and the children because of their bad behavior. And I imagine they would produce make us do the same thing eventually if we didn't do that. That's the only thing I can say.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right. It is a very deep and disturbing and bit of information. I don't simply think, okay, no problem. It is a problem. I wonder to myself, quite honestly, if the Torah sometimes speaks in very broad strokes, okay, and that if in fact, and I think you brought up yesterday how there clearly were some exceptions where these tribes tricked the Jewish people into thinking they were from outside the land of Israel. Now, I'd like to argue, and I'm not saying it's a compelling argument necessarily, but I'd like to argue that if in fact they were accepted, even though they did it by means of trickery, surely if a Canaanite were to sincerely regret the previous behavior that was considered so obnoxious, that they would also be accepted. Because it wouldn't be through trickery, it would be through a sincere desire to take on the the values and the behaviors of a Jewish person at its best. So if in fact we still held up and did not destroy those particular tribes, okay, that pretended they weren't from the seven nations, how much the more so if there was a sincere desire. Now that to me is sort of a humane, and my attempt to give a humane, twist to this. Having said that, I'm also aware that that what the definition of justice essentially is quid pro quo, okay? And part of what we have to understand contextually back then is the degree of cruelty that existed back then, that the Canaanites wouldn't think twice if they were in power to do exactly the same thing to the Israelites.
Like a Nazi. Yeah.
That's an example. I shudder to think what the Taliban are going to do to anyone they think supported America in Afghanistan, which is why there's such terror going on right now, because if we are to believe the reports that come out of there, they are merciless. They are merciless. And the question is, how do you deal with people who have those kind of values, who show absolutely no mercy? I'm not saying that, you don't want to necessarily lower yourself to their level. But on the other hand, you have a right to protect yourself, and you have a right to protect your community, I believe. And Lauren, I invite any comments you want to make in regards to that, especially if you don't agree with me, or if you feel that, that what I'm saying requires some additional...
It's way too complex for the amount of time that we have.
Well, I appreciate your saying that, and I agree with you. I do agree with you. What you're hearing is my struggles to try
Right.
to understand this.
I have just the issue with both of those is that the women have no say in anything.
I know.
In the Torah also.
Um,
This captive woman does not have a choice, as according to what we are reading. She doesn't have a choice. She does it or she does it or she doesn't.
okay.
It's the same thing with the Taliban. You do it or you die. Unfortunately, it's worse with the Taliban.
Okay, so remember again, just to remember that the Torah speaks always in broad strokes. It requires a lot of, shading and stuff like that, which the oral Torah provides us, because then it discusses circumstances. I also want to absolutely underscore the end of this passage, which says, if you don't choose to take her as a wife, she goes free. Okay?
But she still has to be the wife.
God forbid.
She has no say in that, whether she should be a servant or a wife.
No, she's not your servant. That's the point. She is
Right.
not your servant.
No way. No.
All right.
That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah,
is
no.
that,
Okay, so I'm saying,
women got nothing.
okay, again, understand it in its own context, okay? That for a woman to be married back then had a different status than it has perhaps now, okay? Now that doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, it's just a fact, okay?
Oh, no, I understand
And
that.
by the
And
way-
that's where the
by the way-
Taliban is too.
Well,
They are still here.
Yeah, I know.
They're still there. They have not evolved.
Correct. I understand. And for women like in Afghanistan, whose husbands were killed, okay, in battle, there have been many articles, I believe, written about the status of women and children women who are left widowed, okay,
Mhm.
in those particular.
And if there's no family member
Yeah.
to take care of them, no male family member
That is
at
correct.
all.
That is correct.
Right.
So again, as Lauren said, I appreciate what Lauren said. This is way too complicated for us to do it in overtime, for sure. Okay, and we could spend at least a year, I suspect, just discussing all the various elements that go into this, and to be honest about the pros and cons. About I know we see our society as being enlightened, but there may also be elements of problematics. I mean, if you are really to give a vigorous defense to both sides of an argument, one of the things I feel most unfortunate is that intellectually, people are sometimes made to feel inferior if they argue against a particular position. and that's not right. I think that's dishonest. So, just because we don't like what we're hearing doesn't mean we shouldn't listen and find ways in which to counter those arguments that are rational.
And you have to go back to the 70s and even, beyond to put this in context.
Right, of course.
You can't just say this little modern slice of age is,
Yeah.
informs you enough to make decisions about things.
Yes, value judgments, I think, is what I'm getting from what you're saying. Okay.
No, I'm talking about history and the origins of why there is Taliban and
Yes.
and things like that.
Right, and not to hear it from their point of view either. Let's stop the recording here. Thank those who have been with us this morning. Thank you.